Today in Israel and throughout the Jewish world, an annual cycle of holidays provide welcome timeouts from the normal routines of life. By rest and remembrance, an ancient culture is renewed. But do these holidays hold meaning only for the people of Israel? Could 7 of these holy days, tied to an agricultural cycle, hold significance for a non-Jewish world? Could 7 ancient festivals bring people of all nations back to their own spiritual roots? The holidays of God, comparing Jewish and Christian perspectives on this Day of Discovery. This is the land of the Bible, the modern state of Israel, a nation whose calendar reminds its people to remember, to never forget the brightest and darkest moments of their shared history. Some of these holidays, like Holocaust Remembrance and Israel Independence Day, are recent. Some, like Hanukkah and Purim, predate the Common Era. 7 are as ancient as the days and words of Moses. These original 7 holidays are rich with tradition and spiritual meaning. They are an annual cycle of 7 holy days established by the God of the Bible to give His people regular timeouts from the common routines of life. Timeouts linked to a lunar cycle meant to bring out the best in people rather than the worst.
Well, this isn't a bad way to unwind, is it?
The solitude of the desert, the Judean wilderness.
I think this has to be one of my favorite places.
It is. It's lovely.
Never before had a campfire out here before. Just one thing bothers me.
What's that?
That scorpion we found a little while ago. Hey, Jimmy, look at it.
Why don't you watch it? Be careful. They're always under rocks or something.
Yeah. I imagine that when it gets dark enough, the stars would come out here in a way that we haven't seen for a long time in the city. And the moon. Hey, what do you know about the moon?
Well, not a whole lot. I guess it controls the waters of the ocean.
Tides, yeah.
Tides.
Yeah. Hey, you know what percentage water the human body is? 80%. That explains a lot, doesn't it, DeYoung?
This is all water?
No, I mean, in a full moon, it explains. But you hear a lot of stories about full moon.
Yes.
Strange things happen in a full moon. I don't know if I believe it, but we joke about it at home. Something mysterious, something strange happened, and it must be a full moon.
When I was a kid, I can remember telling the ghost stories and the werewolf stories. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, it happens. When does it happen? It always happens
moonlit
on
night.
Yeah. And oftentimes we talk about the moon bringing out the worst in people. But here in Israel, it's different, isn't it? There's a different history to the moon in Israel.
Well, the thing I do know about the moon, as it relates to Israel, is that the calendar of the Jewish people is connected to the moon. It's a lunar calendar.
Yeah. And you may be wondering, well, why in the world would we be out here in the Judean wilderness talking about the lunar calendar of Israel and their cycle of holidays? But I'll tell you, when you want to talk about unwinding and finding rest, there's a principle in the lunar calendar, in the holiday cycle of Israel, that has profound significance for all of us. Let's take a closer look at this important historical holiday cycle.
This holiday cycle is based on a different calendar than our Gregorian system. While our New Year begins in January, the first month of the Jewish religious year begins on the first new moon of spring, the Hebrew month of Nisan. This first month on the Hebrew calendar overlaps our March and April. Marking Israel's historic exodus from Egypt, this is the season of Passover. The Bible calls it the month of Aviv.
What is this month of Aviv? In modern Hebrew, it means spring. But in the Bible, we know that it means that stage of growth of wheat and barley in which the grain, the stalk, is hard on the outside and already hollow on the inside. Where do we know that from? If you remember the plagues of Egypt, and you remember the seventh plague, which is the plague of hail. And we're told that the barley was destroyed because it was in Aviv, but the wheat was unharmed because it was still soft. So what does it mean? When can barley, which ripens about 7 weeks earlier than wheat, when is grain harmed? When it can break. If the wheat was still soft, like grass, it bends with the hail, it didn't break. So from that we can understand the real meaning of the word Aviv, that it's a stage of growth of the grain when it can be broken. And that it is approximately the same time as what we would today call spring in modern parlance. But quite literally, to observe the month of Aviv is to observe that month in which the barley hardens. And in that month you shall celebrate the Passover to the Lord your God.
And of this month of the Passover, we read in the 12th chapter of Exodus, "Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be your beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you."
We come out of Egypt, out of the bondage of Egypt, with herds of sheep and goats. And where are we? We find ourselves in the Sinai desert, where you can make a go of it. It's a subsistence existence as a shepherd, but if you know where you're going, if you know where to find water, just like Bedouin today, you can hack it. It's also an area where there's no competition for your point of belief. I mean, there you are in this expanse of desert, and you have the one God who is guiding you through the desert. There's no problem with it. There's no competition.
Helen frankly describes the point at which she believes the chosen people developed a need for an annual holiday cycle to remember the God who brought them out of Egypt.
Where did the problems begin? When the children of Israel enter the Promised Land, and here we begin to change from a nomadic tribe to a settled nation, where we have to begin farming in the very difficult ecological reality of Israel and the climatic reality of Israel, there are suddenly problems and threats that we never knew in Sinai. Here you have contrasting elements of weather. Here you have all kinds of other problems in terms of agriculture that the Israelites weren't familiar with before. I always imagine the scene in my head of an Israelite coming here. He's settling down and he has his Canaanite neighbor telling him, okay, fine, you've been brought out of Egypt by your God. You're going to build a temple to him in Jerusalem. And he's your God of history. But what does he know about the local problems? He's not from around the neighborhood, you know. So why don't you bring little offerings to our local guys? They know what it's all about. To the Baal, who was the god of rain, and the Tammuz, who was the god of sun, and the most famous of all, the Ashtoreth, the goddess of fertility. We're not asking you to exchange them, just add them onto the list, because they're local and they know all about all the problems. And it's exactly that problem, that constant temptation to be lured away to serve other gods, that the prophets of the First Temple period fought about all the time. This was the temptation, to be lured away to hedge your bets, okay? To pay premiums to the local insurance companies, because they know what it's all about. And that's where the terrible conflict came, to accept this revolution that says, no, it is one omniscient, omnipotent being. You can't make statues of him. You can't see him. He is the God of history, and he is the God of all of nature. You, the individual farmer, may be caught between the rains and the winds and your problems of pollination and fertilization, but it is all in the hands of this one omnipotent God. And you're going to have to accept that on faith. And that's where the drama begins.
It was to remember this God of history and harvest that the law of Moses called for an annual cycle of national timeouts. From the mountain of Sinai, the chosen people learned that once in the promised land, they were to pause from the common work and routines of life at pre-appointed times to come to a predetermined place of worship and sacrifice. As the God of Israel prepared to reveal this cycle, he said to his servant Moses, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, the feasts of the Lord which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, these are my feasts. These are the feasts of the Lord, holy convocations, which you shall proclaim at their appointed times." In the days of King Solomon, the focus of these feasts was the Temple of Jerusalem. Before Solomon, Passover and the other festivals were celebrated at a portable tent of worship known as the tabernacle. For 40 years, this tabernacle was carried through the wilderness, into the promised land, and then here to Shiloh, where for 400 years it drew holiday worshipers to feast and sacrifice. Here, worshipers came to remember that what counts is not merely to believe in God, but to remember the God who formed Israel as a witness to himself.
God said to the Jewish people, I want you as a spiritual people. I want you to be above the mundane Canaanite pagan worship that I see here. On the other hand, you're also normal, natural people. So that when you field and harvest and crop, that is okay. But you have to bring something to my tabernacle and later on to my temple, where at least once a year, at least maybe even 3 times a year, if you're close enough to come, but at least once a year, come and show me that we still have a link, that while you work the land, while you till the land and you get involved in your own personal materialistic existence, don't forget, you have to come back to me. Every once in a while, show me what you've done, express to me that spirituality that can only be done by making an interruption in your life, by leaving your family or taking your family on a trip through the hills and coming up to a place like Shiloh, camping out for a few days, being together with the rest, either your family or friends. And in that way, he created a sort of a back and forth movement.
While neither tabernacle or temple remain today, the holidays of God continue to be at the heart of Jewish life. Since the times of ancient Israel, the feasts of Israel have been important days for family and friends. From the spring festivals of Passover to the harvest holidays of Tabernacles, these timeouts provide not only rest and remembrance, but memories of a lifetime.
For me, Pesach was the most wonderful festival. First of all, I had a beloved grandpa, which meant that we could go and stay with my grandparents. And all the family were together and all the cousins were together. And I remember the first time I was allowed to say the 4 questions. And it was such a thrill. It was the first time and everybody had to listen to me. And I'd listen to all my cousins.
One of the things that stands out in my mind was getting rid of the bread in the house. The night before Pesach, Passover, my father would put so many pieces of bread around, and then early in the morning we'd have to go and look for them, and he had a feather and a box, and he'd shovel it all into this box, and there would be children.
We had beautiful services in the synagogue in which I played when I was brought up. There was a beautiful cantor and a beautiful choir and everything in it, and it made a tremendous impression. And the decoration.
Once we see that the holidays of Israel are not just a matter of tradition, but that they're rooted in an important agricultural cycle tied to significant historic events, the next question is, so what? What meaning does this cycle have for us today? And the answer, interestingly enough, may depend on whether you're looking at it from a Christian or Jewish perspective.
The purpose of these holidays is not to remember something that happened long ago, not to observe an event, however important, in a national calendar or even on a universal level, that transpired many, many generations ago. That is true, and that event, whichever it happens to be it, for example, Shabbat, the Sabbath, the creation of the world, or be it the Exodus from Egypt, that event happened, and that event continues to shake the world. But that's not it. That's not the idea for us. The concept is really that in every generation, this is happening all over again. This is recurring. It's a constant thing. when it comes to something like Passover, for example. As we all know, Passover is the commemoration of the Exodus from Egypt. But Egypt exists on many levels, the sages tell us. There is the Egypt of Pharaoh of long ago, where our ancestors were enslaved. And there is the modern-day Egypt, which exists both from without and from within. Each person, Egypt is representative of the evil inclination, which each person has and which each person must combat. And this, in a way, is representative of the whole secret of the Jewish calendar, of the sacred seasons of God, and how it all works out, and how each holiday falls in its place precisely at the time when God, who created man after all, knows when that creation, when his handiwork, a human being, needs a certain kind of spiritual insight, a certain kind of spiritual uplifting. That's when these holidays come. Like the verse in the Song of Songs, the voice of my beloved knocks. The holiday comes, the festival comes like a knock on the door. It's a knock of opportunity, if you would. Open up, an opportunity knocks. And the opportunity is to connect completely with this love that God has for us.
And the music played a tremendous part in my life, and the music, the cantorial music and the choir and the atmosphere and the contents of those prayers. I think anybody who takes up those prayers and reads them must, it embraces the pathos and the joy and the happiness and everything of the Jewish people. I think Rosh Hashanah.
Everybody will wear white clothes, or at least very light colors when it comes to the synagogue. And the synagogue will be very serious, very quiet. Everybody, they will not talk loudly, they will talk very quiet to each other. You have a feeling that they are really thinking about what they have done, what will be, etc.
Sukkot is a time that I love very much, but I also am very happy when it is finished. Because we built sukkah, we don't have a balcony, and we built sukkah downstairs, and we live on the 4th floor. We have all our meals in the sukkah. So I have to bring all the food downstairs, and we have it, and then to bring everything. First 3 days, it's okay. But
So these are the times that God gives us for recharging our spiritual energies, kind of recharging our spiritual batteries, and as emphasized or as personified perhaps, as embodied by the experience of the pilgrimage, dropping everything, this concept of taking off the time to rest, leaving the world of our own selfish endeavors and accomplishments, what we like to refer to as accomplishments, behind, and coming just to be in the presence of God. And when we leave the presence of God, be it in the temple after the pilgrimage, or now in our own homes when the festival leaves us, we have now a new energy level, a new conception of God, we've been clicked into a new state of awareness wherein we have the power now to navigate through all of the vicissitudes of our humdrum life, revitalized by the new knowledge that we have, that we've gleaned from the experience of observing the festival, that throughout all of this sometimes frustrating, tumultuous experience of just the stuff of life, God is directly in our midst.
And so we see in the cycle of feast that 3 times per year Jewish people would make their way up to Jerusalem, some of them traveling through the Kidron Valley, where I'm standing right now, up to the Temple Mount to observe the feast.
Some might find it inappropriate for Christians to try to find meaning in a Jewish pattern of holidays. So let's take a closer look at how the Christian perspective finds messianic significance in these days.
Jewish people and Christians both believe that there is a prophetic significance to the holidays of God, to the Feast of Israel. The difference is, Christians believe that the Messiah who has come in the past fulfilled the first 4 feasts with his death, his burial, resurrection, and his giving of the Spirit on the day of Pentecost. Based upon that, they anticipate that this same Messiah will fulfill the last 3 feasts, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Feast of Tabernacles, with the regathering, the redemption, and the rejoicing of the Jewish people.
From a Christian perspective, the Jewish holiday cycle becomes a picture of one Messiah with 2 appearances. In the eyes of many Christians, the first group of spring feasts relate to the days of Messiah's sacrifice. In this view, the summer months separating spring and fall festivals represents this present age, when the gospel of a suffering Messiah brings together into one body all who believe, whether Jew or Gentile. The New Testament calls this international body of believers the Church. The 3 holidays of the 7th month are seen by many Christians to foreshadow the days of Messiah's rule. In this view, Messiah's second coming will assure the national and spiritual restoration of Israel in the last days.
Now, every one of those feasts, interestingly enough, had 4 distinct elements that were in them, in every one of them. First of all, there was the historical element. He said, you remember, I want you to remember. And then there was the agricultural element, that you're to be thankful to a benevolent God who looked down on you in mercy and supplied your needs. And then there was the sacrificial aspect. You need reconciliation to God. That was a sacrificial element. And then there was the prophetic element, which was Messianic fulfillment or anticipation.
I think that the holidays, holy days, given in Leviticus 23, are given in a specific order for a specific purpose. When I was growing up, I was so focused in like a microscope on each particular day that if you would have asked me, what is the significance of these? I was so concerned with following what I should do, I couldn't even answer that question. After I became a Christian, it forced me to think, to kind of step back and instead of a microscope, look at it through a telescope and get a broader perspective.
I'll tell you something, Jimmy. People have to see the real picture of the holidays, okay? Think all about the data in the holidays. Every holiday, people come to Jerusalem or stay wherever they are. What happened in Jerusalem? Every holiday it goes around a sacrifice in the temple. Now, what kind of God do we have? Teaches us that every holiday someone needs to die? What is the purpose of it? Think about the amount of blood that goes down of the temple in every holiday. Every holiday, it goes around sacrifices. Someone else is losing its life for us to celebrate a holiday. Is this a fun issue or a teaching issue? Of course it's a teaching issue, but it teaches us that in order to live, someone else pay in his life. That's the teaching mode in every holiday, and right now, regardless of the name of the holiday, what this teaches you. Of course it speaks about the sacrifice. Of course it speaks about the meaning to stay clean before the Lord. One holiday to another holiday to another holiday, regardless of the name of the holiday for this purpose.
The New Testament author of Hebrews records how Jesus became the final sacrifice. For Christ has not entered the holy places made with hands, which are copies of the true, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. Not that he should offer himself often, as the high priest enters the most holy place every year with blood of another. He then would have had to suffer often since the foundation of the world. But now, once, at the end of the ages, he has appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself.
All the holidays were a shadow of the job of Christ. Now, since he came and paid it all by himself, then you don't need to deal with a copy, with a shadow. You have the original. What do you want? Take the original, leave the copy. This is the idea, and that's what God teaches. That's why I took the temple, not to give you even a reason to do mistake.
And then all of those things that were in every feast, inherent in the feast, the element of remembrance, the element of thanksgiving, the element of having a sacrifice, the element of a prophetic fulfillment is ours today, dramatically and dynamically in the Messiah.
Christ was offered once to bear the sins of many. To those who eagerly wait for him, he will appear a second time, apart from sin, for salvation.
But maybe you're a Christian looking at this, and you say, but what are we saying? These are Jewish feasts. Are we suggesting that Christians should begin celebrating this cycle of holidays? Not in the sense that Old Testament Israel did, because if you'll remember, the God of Moses indicated that if his people did not come to this city, to Jerusalem, and offer up their sacrifices on the day of celebration, that they would literally be cut off from their people. Now, Christians are not under that kind of law. In fact, the New Testament says, in the words of the Apostle Paul, that we are not to let anyone judge us when it comes to a Sabbath, a Shabbat, or a festival. But rather, Paul says that these are all, now this is from a Christian point of view, but these are all shadows. They're a pattern of things to come. And Paul goes on to say that they are shadows of the Messiah Jesus. Now, if Paul is right, then there is something for Christians in this ancient cycle of holidays. Because not only can we find a pattern of shadows which confirm that he is Messiah, but we also have in these holidays a whole new way of finding timeless principles of the provider God who teaches us how to find rest in our work and how to live in dependence upon the work that he has done for us.